For 5 years, Wendell grieved the loss of his brother Garrett and his sister-in-law Corinne, who were swallowed by the Delaware River during a freak storm on their anniversary trip. The official story was a tragic accident, a narrative Wendell reluctantly accepted. But when a group of teenagers finds a distinctive yellow dry bag, one he personally gifted them, snagged on old industrial rebar miles downstream, the discovery reopens a wound he thought had scarred over. Inside the torn bag, investigators find something that doesn't belong, a single high-caliber bullet casing lodged in the waterproof lining. This one small metallic object changed everything, turning a story of tragedy into a tale of suspicion. It makes you wonder what secrets can lie hidden just beneath the surface of what we accept as truth. Stick with me as we unravel this mystery. The grief had become a part of Wendell's life, a quiet roommate that never left. It was in the empty chair at holiday dinners, in the silence when a song they all used to love came on the radio, and most of all, it was in the oppressive humidity of late August, the same time of year Garrett and Corinne had vanished. He'd built a wall around that part of his memory, focusing on his work as a civil engineer, on the neat, predictable lines of blueprints that made sense in a way that life no longer did. He had accepted the official story because it was the only one available. A sudden, violent summer storm had appeared out of nowhere, catching them on a remote stretch of the river. Their rented kayak was found days later, overturned and empty. No bodies were ever recovered. It was a clean, senseless tragedy. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. It was the Pike County Sheriff's Department. Wendell's heart seized, the way it always did when an unknown number flashed on his screen. He expected a sales call, but the officer's solemn tone immediately transported him back 5 years. A group of kids exploring an old industrial site downriver had found a bag. A yellow dry bag with a cartoon octopus on it. Wendell's breath caught in his throat. He had bought that bag for them as a joint anniversary gift just before their trip. It was a silly, cheerful thing, meant to protect their phones and wallets on their adventures. At the station, the bag sat on a sterile metal table, looking horribly out of place. It was faded, stained with river mud, and a jagged tear ran along the bottom seam. That's when Detective Harding, a man with tired eyes who remembered the case, slid a small evidence baggie across the table. "We found this wedged in the lining, near the tear," he said. Inside was a single brass bullet casing. It wasn't a story of a storm anymore. Storms don't leave behind bullet casings. For the first time in 5 years, the cold, hard grief Wendell had learned to live with was replaced by a hot, sharp flicker of rage. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that his brother and sister-in-law had not been victims of the weather. They had been victims of something far more sinister. The police were officially reopening the case, but Wendell knew he couldn't just sit by and wait. He had to do something himself. He had to know who had turned their anniversary trip into an execution. His first and only thought was Sterling Croft. Sterling had been Garrett's business partner, the co-founder of their successful environmental tech firm, Terra Gen. After Garrett's death, Sterling had become the sole owner, and the company had, by all accounts, flourished. Wendell had always found Sterling to be a little too smooth, his grief at the memorial service a little too polished. He decided to pay him a visit, under the pretense of sharing the news, but his real goal was to watch Sterling's face when he mentioned the bullet. The TerraGen offices were sleek and modern, a world of glass and brushed steel that felt 1,000,000 miles away from the murky Delaware River. Sterling greeted him with a practiced, sympathetic smile. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled. He looked every bit the successful CEO. He ushered Wendell into his spacious office, the window behind him offering a panoramic view of the city. "Wendell, it's been too long," Sterling said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "What brings you by?" Wendell got straight to the point. He told him about the bag, watching Sterling's face for any crack in his composure. There was none. Sterling simply nodded, his expression a mask of sorrow. "My God," he murmured. "After all this time. That's incredible. I can't imagine how hard this must be for you and your parents." But when Wendell mentioned the bullet casing, he saw it. A flicker, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes before it was gone. "A bullet?" Sterling said, forcing a confused laugh. "That's bizarre. It must have just washed into the bag from the river over the years. You know all the hunting that goes on up there." He was dismissing it, too quickly, too easily. It wasn't the reaction of a genuinely shocked friend. It was the reaction of someone trying to control a narrative. Wendell left the office with a knot tightening in his stomach. Sterling's casual explanation felt like a lie, smooth and practiced. It was time to dig deeper. He remembered Garrett mentioning a former employee, a woman named Janine, who had been the company's head accountant. She'd left Tara-Jen about 6 months after the accident, under circumstances Garrett's parents had called abrupt. Wendell found her working at a small accounting firm in a quiet suburb. She was hesitant to talk at first, but when Wendell explained his suspicions, her professional caution gave way to a troubled conscience. "I left because I couldn't stand the lies," Janine confessed, her voice low as they sat in a small coffee shop. Sterling told everyone the company was thriving, but it was a fantasy. Before Garrett disappeared, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. She explained that they had overextended on a new project, and their primary investor had pulled out. They were bleeding money, and Garrett was stressed beyond belief. He was trying to find a solution, working day and night, she said. But Sterling, he was different. He was calm. He kept talking about a new private investor he'd found, someone who was going to save them. The idea that Tara-Jen was failing was a shock. Sterling had painted a picture of seamless success. "Did you ever find out who this investor was?" Wendell asked. Janine shook her head. "No. Sterling handled it all himself, said it was a delicate deal. Then, after Garrett was gone, suddenly all our financial problems vanished. Sterling said he'd secured the funding. A few months later, I was offered a generous severance package to leave. He said he was restructuring. I knew he was just getting rid of anyone who knew the truth about how bad things had been." Wendell's next step was to get his hands on the company's old financial records. As Garrett's brother and a partial heir to his estate, he had a legal right to access them. He spent the next week buried in paperwork, cross-referencing spreadsheets and bank statements from the year Garrett died. What he found made his blood run cold. Just 3 weeks before the kayaking trip, a massive life insurance policy had been taken out on Garrett. It wasn't a personal policy. It was a corporate one, a key man policy worth $5 million. The sole beneficiary was not Corinne, but Tara-Jen, the company now wholly owned by Sterling Croft. The payout had occurred 2 months after Garrett was legally declared dead. The money had entered the company's accounts, and, almost immediately, a series of large, untraceable cash withdrawals began. The private investor Janine had mentioned didn't exist. The $5 million insurance payout was what had saved the company. Sterling hadn't found a savior. He had found a motive for murder. Digging further, Wendell found payments to a holding company he didn't recognize. A quick search revealed its owner, a man known to law enforcement as a notorious local loan shark. Sterling hadn't just been in business debt. He was in dangerous personal debt. He hadn't just killed his partner to save their company. He'd killed him to save his own skin. Wendell felt a wave of nausea. This was no longer just a suspicion. It was a cold, calculated plot. Sterling had been drowning in debt, so he took out an insurance policy on his partner, lured him and his wife out to a remote part of the river, and murdered them, making it look like a tragic accident. The freak storm hadn't been the cause of their deaths. It had been the cover. But he still needed something more, something that tied Sterling directly to the act itself. The financial records were a powerful motive, but they weren't the smoking gun. He called Janine again, his voice tight with a mixture of discovery and dread. He asked her if Garrett kept any personal notes or logs, anything separate from the official company servers. Janine paused for a long moment. "He did?" she said finally. "He was old-fashioned in some ways. He kept a private work journal on a personal cloud server. He said it was for his big ideas, but I think it was also where he vented. He was worried about Sterling's desperation. He gave me the login details once, in case anything ever happened to him." The password worked. Wendell's hands trembled as he opened the last file, dated 2 days before the anniversary trip. Garrett's words appeared on the screen, a ghost reaching out from the past. He wrote about a massive fight with Sterling. He had discovered the life insurance policy and the secret loans from the loan shark. He was furious. "Sterling has lost his mind," Garrett wrote. "He's making deals with monsters. I told him it's over. I'm dissolving the partnership as soon as Corinne and I get back from our trip. I'll buy him out, whatever it takes to get this poison out of my life." It was all there. The final piece of the puzzle. Garrett was going to expose him. The anniversary trip wasn't just a celebration. It was the deadline for Sterling's entire world to collapse. And Sterling had made sure Garrett never came back to see it through. With the log entry saved and the financial evidence compiled, Wendell knew it was time. He couldn't just hand this over to the police and wait. He needed to see Sterling's face when his world finally came crashing down. He called Sterling and asked for a meeting at the office that evening, telling him it was about finalizing some details of Garrett's estate. Sterling agreed, his voice as smooth and untroubled as ever. Before he left, Wendell made 2 calls. One was to Detective Harding, telling him everything and asking him to be ready. The other was to a lawyer, just in case. He met Sterling in the same glass-walled office, but this time the city lights twinkling behind him seemed sinister, like the unblinking eyes of a predator. Wendell didn't waste time with pleasantries. He laid a copy of the insurance policy on the polished desk, then the bank statements showing the withdrawals, then the evidence of the loan shark. Sterling's calm facade began to crack, his face paling, a sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead. "What is this?" he stammered, his voice losing its confident edge. "This is business." "Is this business too?" Wendell asked, turning his laptop around to show him Garrett's final journal entry. Sterling stared at the screen, at his dead partner's words. The mask didn't just crack, it shattered. All the color drained from his face, and his carefully constructed composure dissolved into raw panic. He looked up at Wendell, his eyes wide with the terror of a cornered animal. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice raspy. "The pressure. He was going to ruin everything for both of us." "He was going to save you," Wendell said, his voice cold and even. "He was your friend, and you killed him for money." Sterling broke. He slumped in his chair, his head in his hands, and the confession poured out of him in a torrent of pathetic sobs and excuses. He told Wendell how he'd brought a pistol with him on the river, hidden in his own bag. How he'd suggested they explore a remote, narrow channel, away from the main river traffic. He described the argument, how Garrett had threatened to expose him. He admitted to shooting Garrett, then panicking as the storm rolled in. He'd pushed the kayak, with the terrified Corinne still in it, out into the raging current, knowing she couldn't swim well. He had watched it capsize before he fled, using the storm as his alibi. "I had to," Sterling sobbed. "There was no other way." As he spoke, Wendell quietly activated the recording app on his phone. Just as Sterling finished his confession, the office doors burst open. Detective Harding and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Sterling looked up, his face a grotesque mask of shock and despair. It was over. Months later, after the trial had concluded and Sterling had been sentenced to life in prison, Wendell went back to the Delaware River. He stood on the bank, watching the water flow peacefully under the late afternoon sun. It was no longer a place of monstrous uncertainty. The anger had cooled, leaving behind the deep, familiar ache of grief. But it was different now. It was a clean grief. A grief for the brother he loved and the life he'd lost, not the confusing, gnawing pain of a mystery. He had found the truth, not for revenge, but for them, to give their story a proper ending. He had honored his brother's memory, and in doing so, he had finally found a way to let him go. It's a difficult situation when loyalty to a friend conflicts with doing the right thing. What do you think you would have done if you were Janine, the accountant? Would you have spoken up sooner about the company's financial troubles, or was waiting for someone to ask the right thing to do? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found yourself captivated by this story of justice, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have many more tales of truth uncovered waiting for you.